Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm Nick Burns. I'm Executive Director of the Aspen Security Forum. Welcome to this conversation with Madame Christine Lagarde, President of the European Central Bank. The Aspen Security Forum is a nonprofit and also nonpartisan American entity that seeks to bring people together from around the world to talk about the leading issues of the day in global economics and global politics, in international relations. We're really honored that Christine Lagarde is with us today. She'll be interviewed by our friend and our fellow member of the Aspen Strategy Group, David Rubenstein. And the closing remarks will be given by our co-host today, Dr. Melissa Kearney. She's the director of the Aspen Economic Strategy Group. I think all of you know Christine Lagarde. She's had a remarkable career. In addition to her duties as president of the European Central Bank, she was, of course, managing director of the International Monetary Fund. She was economic finance minister and trade minister for the government of France, and also chairman of the global law firm Baker McKenzie. We honor her today because she's been one of the most remarkable, most distinguished public servants of her time. She'll be interviewed by an equally remarkable person, David Rubenstein. David is co-founder and co-chair of the Carlyle Group in Washington, D.C. He is chairman of more nonprofit institutions that are central to American society than anyone I know. And if you look at his bio, I can't read the list because we'd be here all day, but he is chair of the board of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. He's a fellow of the Harvard Corporation, and we at Harvard are grateful for everything that David has done for our university. He's a regent of the Smithsonian Institution. And I must say, David has pioneered patriotic philanthropy. He has done so much to preserve the history of the United States, from renovating himself, paying for the renovation of the Washington Monument, to purchasing the Magna Carta for the Smithsonian Institution and the National Archives. We're really grateful for everything that David has done. And welcome to Dr. Melissa Kearney. We're interested to hear from her at the end. She's a celebrated economist. Christine Lagarde is obviously here to talk about her duties as president of the European Central Bank. What's on our minds? What's the impact of the pandemic on the European Union economy, the largest economy in the world? Can that economy bounce back to growth in 2021? We certainly hope so as friends of the EU. What are the opportunities for global leadership by the G7 and G20 to bring the world back when the pandemic mercifully ends to some degree of normalcy? That's what Christine Lagarde will talk about today, among many other things. And I turn it over to her and our good friend, David Rubenstein. David.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you, President Lagarde, for being here. Let me just start by saying that some people in Washington, as you know, were surprised that you were willing to take on this position because you were the director of the IMF, which is a global organization and has enormous amounts of power around the world. The ECB is very important, of course, but it's focused mostly on Europe. Any second thoughts about having taken this position in light of what has happened in terms of the pandemic and so forth since you took on the job?
Straight into your question, David, as usual. But before that, let me say that I'm delighted to participate and very pleased to see old friends and to hear about them, including yourself. No second thought. It's a different perspective. I would characterize it as a smaller window, but a much bigger toolbox. Smaller window because instead of looking at all countries of the world, assessing their economic developments, reviewing their policies, making recommendations, and occasionally offering some financial support in consideration for efforts to restructure their economies, which was the traditional job at the IMF. I look at this from a smaller window because Europe is obviously only one region of the world and not 190 countries as the IMF looks at, but much bigger toolbox and much bigger hammer or bazooka, whatever you want to call it. But certainly the tools that can be used, the speed at which they can be used, and the impact that those tools have has nothing to do with what we had at the IMF. It's heavy, it's very fast, and it has an instant impact.
So when you want to get something done at the IMF, I don't know, I assume you could get it done. You had to lobby some people, maybe directors and so forth. When you want to get something done at the ECB, I assume you have to lobby some prime ministers or presidents or so forth. What is easier to get something passed? Is it easier to get something done at the IMF or easier to get something done at the ECB?
I would say, David, that given the status of the European Central Bank, which is an independent central bank, I mean, it's actually written down in the treaty that I can take no instructions, no order from any heads of states in the European Union, and no European Union leader can attempt to direct my actions or determine my policy. It's in the treaty. The European Central Bank is an independent institution. So I don't have to lobby them. I don't have to seek their consent, approval. If I want to inform them, alert them, I'm at liberty to do that. But it's a matter which is dealt with by the governing council of the central bank, and the 25 members around the table have to come to conclusion about the policies that we want to put in place. So I'd say faster at the European Central Bank than it would be at the IMF. The IMF is, look, it's not a sleepy institution by any means. That's not what I want to say, but it has to prepare, alert, campaign, lobby, and so on and so forth, particularly when there are some political issues that can oppose different geopolitical forces.
Okay, let's talk about the European economy right now. In your view, has the pandemic's effect on the European economy, the worst is behind Europe now, or do you think it's too early to say the worst is behind Europe and the pandemic could rise again? So in your view, where's the state of the economy because of the pandemic?
You know, I think it's still too early to say. And I remember vividly back in last June, after the first wave had come and gone, we thought, okay, this is over. And everybody went out for the summer and enjoyed themselves with some caution, but essentially assuming it was gone. And then it came back, and the second wave was on us all. So we have gone through the third wave here in Europe. In many countries, most scientists would agree that the peak is now behind us, and we are gradually going down in terms of hospitalizations, in terms of contagions, in terms of all the downside impact of the third wave. But there's still countries which are taking some lockdown measures, containment measures, and where the virus is still extremely active. So I'd say probably past the peak of the third wave. Downside risks, obviously, because there are still variants and new evolution of this damn virus going around. But the big difference that we have compared with last June is that there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel, and we see it because the vaccinations, be them ARN messenger or traditional vaccines, are now really being rolled out, and it's now finally accelerating over here in Europe. So by all accounts, it seems that end of June, about 70% of the population should be vaccinated, at least with the first jab.
In the United States, vaccinations are at a higher percentage than in Europe for maybe a number of reasons. But do you think that there is a problem in Europe and that people don't want to be vaccinated? There's a fear of being vaccinated the way there is in some parts of the United States. Is there a kind of a political or a health-related reason why some people just do not want to be vaccinated? Or is that not going to be a problem in Europe when you want to try to get everybody vaccinated?
You know, first of all, there are different vaccines. Some of them are much more standard and traditional and less, and give rise to less anxiety on the part of people. So that has to do with the category of vaccinations. Second, there are some trials that have had their little hiccups along the way, which has also shaken a little bit the confidence that people had in the simple principle of vaccinations. And third, you have a category of people that are reluctant to any kind of vaccinations. I mean, this is not peculiar to Europe. It is also the case, as I understand, in California, where quite a lot of a good percentage of the population is simply hostile to vaccination as a matter of principle. So we have all that combined. But what we have observed lately is a much larger proportion of the population that is prepared to be vaccinated than, say, 6 months, not 6 months ago, because vaccines were not really out there. But I think in the last 2 months, it has really changed quite a bit. And we see a larger proportion of people here in Europe who are prepared to be vaccinated. It varies within Europe, by the way. The French tend to be less willing to be vaccinated than others.
I assume you've been vaccinated. Did you have any side effects, or did okay?
I only had the first jab so far. So far, so good.
Okay.
I'll tell you in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay, so let's talk about the economy in Europe right now. The United States, they're projecting a 6 or 7% GDP growth this year, which is fueled a bit by the enormous amount of stimulus we put into the economy. What type of growth rate are you predicting now for this year in Europe?
Europe this year is looking like a tale of two halves, if I may borrow from Charles Dickens. The first half, not particularly good, and the first quarter in particular, not good, most likely negative still. Second quarter, better, and clearly we're seeing good signs in terms of PMI, in terms of high frequency numbers, that is indicating that we are now on the way up. And the second half of 21 with a robust rebound and good solid economic growth. So that's what I say, a story of two halves. In 21, our baseline is still the same. We're still seeing 21 at a good, 4%, let's put it that way, for the whole of the euro area, and 4.1% the year after. So it's not as strong as the numbers that you have in the US, but the stimulus package that was put in place in 21 by the Biden administration is clearly helping along the way. And the vaccination rollout that you have very effectively also put in place in the United States is helping.
Now, as in the United States, the ECB has taken enormous action to help the economy, lending money and buying bonds and so forth. Do you think that you have taken as much action as you need to take to keep the European economy on a good glide path, or are you prepared to consider additional actions at this time, or you think it's not necessary at this time?
I would observe, David, that what we have done in the last year has proven quite efficient. It was needed, and it was effective. When I look at the result in terms of financing, availability of liquidity, spreads, yields, all of that is telling us that we did what we had to do and what was needed in order to support the economy, in order to avoid fragmentation, in order to make sure that liquidity was flowing and that banks were able to lend to enterprises and to households. So I think all that has been was very needed, proved to be efficient. And I think our commitment to make sure that there is favorable financing conditions available for all economic actors on an ongoing basis as we are still going through this pandemic, as we have not yet crossed the bridge towards full-fledged recovery remains intact. So we need to continue to support. We are on our way, but certainly not well into the way of the recovery where we need to be. I've said on a couple of occasions that the European economy is on two crutches, the fiscal one, the monetary one, and those crutches have to remain supporting the patient until it can walk on its own. We're not there yet.
In the United States, obviously, we have a different situation where one country with one fiscal policy, or theoretically one fiscal policy, you have more than one fiscal policy. Is there anything that you think that the ECB or Europe can do to improve the situation where you have one monetary policy and maybe something closer to one fiscal policy, or is that too far into the future to worry about?
the European Union and the United States are structured in a different way. And the European Union has been work in progress for the last 70 years and will continue to be so for probably another few decades. For the moment, what we have is clearly a monetary union that works well, and we have different fiscal authorities in each of the 19 member states that form the monetary union. Sometimes it doesn't work so well, and it produces headwinds in the nose of monetary policy. Sometimes it works well, and it actually leverages and optimizes monetary policy, and vice versa. I think in the crisis that we have just seen, monetary policy and fiscal policy actually worked hand in hand well and complemented each other. Now, granted, it originated from 19 different countries, but it was well coordinated and it was disciplined so that it could reinforce what monetary policy was doing, and vice versa. Monetary policy was amplifying what the fiscal authorities decided to do in order to face this unbelievable economic situation that we were facing after this horrible health pandemic that affected all of us.
Your predecessor famously said that he would do whatever it took to support the euro. You haven't had quite the same existential threat to the euro, but the euro is actually doing reasonably well compared to what some people might have thought. Do you worry about the euro's future or its value vis-a-vis the dollar? How do you look at the euro?
I tell you something, David. I didn't repeat what Mario rightly said at the time, that the ECB would do whatever it takes within its mandate. But what I said very clearly on March the 18th at 11:30 p.m., if I recall, by way of a tweet, because that's the way you have to communicate those days, is that our support to the euro had no limit. And anybody in their right mind who knows how the ECB functions, who knows how monetary policy support functions in this part of the world, got the message that because of the exceptional circumstances that we were facing, we had put in place an exceptional response that was pandemic emergency based, but that would have no limit, that would hamper the effectiveness of the monetary policy we had to put in place. So I think our support to the euro has no limit was a message that got through very well and produced the impact that it had to produce. Now, in terms of the euro itself, I would like to just mention that we just yesterday had the result of an annual survey that is conducted about the euro and whether people in Europe actually like the euro, support it, feel comfortable with it, and the same with the ECB. And we have seen notable improvement and progress on both accounts. The Europeans are very attached to the euro. They want it, they like it, they support it. And that has improved over the course of the pandemic. And the same goes true as well for the ECB. So I'm quite pleased about that. There's nothing like your direct compatriots and your clients, in a way, feeling happy about the work. But the euro itself as a currency, because that was your point, it's not something that we actually target. It's something that we monitor relative to other currencies around the world. And we monitor very carefully any movement, be it depreciation and even more so appreciation. And we are particularly attentive to the impact that it has on price and pressures that it can apply to prices.
Now, do you coordinate very much or have consultations with the US Fed chairman, Jay Powell? How does that work? People wonder, does the chairman of the Fed talk to the head of the ECB, and is that regular or is it just haphazard, or how does it work?
Well, we talk on a regular basis with Jay Powell, and particularly in times of crisis. Around I'd say during the second half of March, I think we spoke, not daily, but every other day we were on the phone to each other. And clearly we had particular matters to address at that point. We responded collectively with other key central banks around the world to make sure that there would be masses of liquidity around, because there was this dash for cash People in the trade, in the markets wanted to hang on to dollars and strong currencies. So we put in place the open swap lines that we had to reactivate. And we did that on a very, expedited, very efficient and well-coordinated basis. But in normal times, we talk also on a regular basis about our respective economic circumstances, what we are facing. We talk about innovation, new developments, climate change, CBDCs, and what have you. One thing that we, do not coordinate is clearly our monetary policy, because we operate, as you know, in different environments with at different point in the cycle, and we are independent of each other.
Let's talk about climate change. You just mentioned that. Jay Powell has talked about the impact of climate change on the U.S. economy. And I think it's obviously a subject of great interest in Europe as well. How do you look at climate change and the impact on the European economy? Is it something you can deal with, or it's outside of your mandate?
I would say it's not for us, but it's for all of us. And what I mean, it's not for us. Those who are driving that bus of the fight against climate change are the governments, are the fiscal authorities, are the ministers of energies, and whether they remove subsidies to fossil energy, or whether they set the right price for carbon emission and set it up in the form of ETS or carbon tax or whatever. It's for them to decide. And those are the most critically important decisions. In the same vein, it is for policymakers and government to regulate in such a way that we take the right, both social, societal, cultural, and economic decisions and deviate from where we are heading. So they are driving that bus. But it's for us all, because in whichever position we are, we can play a role. Now, clearly for a central bank like the ECB, we have a mandate. We have we are single mandate as opposed to the Fed, which is dual mandate. But climate change has an impact. It has an impact on how we are going to model our assessment of the economy, our forecast. It has an impact on how we're going to devise monetary policy. It has an impact on where our star is going to be and how much space we have in terms of monetary policy action. It has an impact on how we manage portfolios. And as you know, because we are buying not only sovereign bonds, but also corporate bonds, clearly we have to assess that portfolio and do proper risk management of those bonds that we have in stock, and those that we will continue to buy under the purchase programs that we have in place. And we have to take that into account very much when we supervise the banking sector. So in those three dimensions, climate change actually plays a role that we need to factor in our models, our monetary policy design, and our supervision.
In the United States, income inequality has been a big issue before the pandemic. The pandemic seems to have exacerbated income inequality. Is the same issue rising in Europe? You've had less income inequality, but has income inequality to the level you had it gotten to be worse in Europe, or is that not an issue there compared to the United States?
Well, the inequalities in general have been exacerbated by the pandemic in Europe as well. Because when we look at the unemployment, the jobs that have gone, they are largely those jobs with the low skills, with the younger workers, and a little less so women. But the two categories that are worst hit are those with low skills, are those who have just joined the job markets. So no question that that impact of the pandemic has accentuated inequalities in that respect. So we're talking about inequalities of income, possibly inequality of opportunities as well.
So you were living in Europe for many years before you came to the United States to work at Baker McKenzie, and then also when you were at the IMF. how would you compare your experience in the United States with sexism that you experienced and written about in the United States compared to sexism in Europe? Where is there less sexism? And do you have any comment on what is now known in the United States as Sofagate, where the leader of a European leader, the European Council, was not allowed to, I guess, get a seat because she was maybe a woman? That was at least how was reported. Do you have any views on where sexism is least a problem, or is it the same in both Europe and the United States?
David, I think there's plenty of that still going around. And it's very, very unfortunate and very sad. And not only is it offensive to those who have to bear the brunt of it and put up with that, but it's a huge waste of opportunity, and it's a huge waste of talent. I mean, it does take the form of the Sofagate kind of business, which is an expression of the sexism that we have around. But it also takes the form of those sort of lack of access, discrimination, hinted biases, dismissive comments, and it goes on and on and on. And I think it would really be to the credit of policymakers, governments, leaders of institutions, leaders in the corporate world to take a stand and steps in order to make sure that that doesn't happen. As I said, from an economic point of view, only looking from that angle, it's a huge waste of talent.
But do you still experience, you're the head of the ECB, one of the most important jobs, certainly in Europe and maybe the world. Do you experience sexism at this point, or you're above that because of your exalted position, or that is not the case? You still experience it?
Oh, no, I still experience it, of course. You know the world of finance, David, and it's not short of sexism, that world. And I do read comments here and there. I do see market observers who have those vaguely dismissive and often patronizing comments about what I do or what I wear or what I say, and there's a very lovely Belgium saying which says, it's to laugh if it wasn't to cry. And I try to stay on the laughing side rather than the crying side, because I don't want to be sad.
So you were, as in your youth, a synchronized swimmer, and you were on the national team in France on the synchronized swimming. And I know you like to swim. Do you have a chance when you're the ECB to swim anymore, or because of COVID, there's no swimming anymore?
Swimming is gone, David. All the pools are closed. Germany is still under serious lockdown, and I can't wait to go back in the water and to swim again. Yeah.
So have you been running the ECB remotely, and is your staff working remotely, or have you been in the office?
It's been mixed. Hybrid in that I spend generally about 2 weeks in Frankfurt, 1 week away, because it's essentially the ECB, like so many other buildings, is emptied of its normal staff workers. Most of them are working remotely, some of them from their apartments in Frankfurt, others from their normal residence back wherever they are from. But it's a pretty lonely place to work from. So I spend time there, but I try to also relocate a bit, not too far from family members here in Paris, which is where I am at the moment. I'm not going to pretend anything else, but I have set up a subsidiary of the ECB in my apartment. And this is the ECB BIS in Paris. Okay.
Well, I assume it's the food is better where you are now. I don't know, but in any event, let me ask you this. What about going forward? In the United States, many companies and government organizations are saying, once the pandemic is over, we don't think our employees want to come back to work 5 days a week and work the way they used to. Have you had to address that issue yet? And do you think the ECB will, and other European big organizations, will come back to work 5 days a week in the traditional way or not?
The answer to that is no. And we are working on it, and we have been consulting with staff on it, and we are surveying staff to understand exactly how they feel about it. But we've also, all of us, I think, learned enormously from that period of time. And we have learned skills that we didn't have. We've experienced remote working relationships. We have not lost much in terms of productivity, quite sometimes to the contrary. But my take on it is that we will probably move towards a hybrid model, where there will be work from home, teleworking we call it here, and work from the office, and a combination of both. I think that when we work with people, and we need to have people come together, talk to each other, look at each other's eyes, body, and reaction, in order to have innovation, in order to have creativity, in order to have brain picking and brain sharing, which tend to produce the best outcomes. So I think it's going to be a combination of both, in order to optimize the outcome on the one hand, and to make sure that people are satisfied with the way in which they operate. We need to guard against the absolute enthusiasm about teleworking and doing everything from home, because I think it raises issues of forming a community, which is also what work is about. And we need to guard against this work-life balance, which can be really difficult to preserve for the sanity of people. We have been very attentive to the health and psychological health of people when they work remotely and they know no limit.
So if somebody wants to be an employee of the ECB, how many languages do they have to speak? And what is the main language? When you're conducting business, is it French or German or English or all of them? How do you conduct business? In what language?
It will surprise you, especially now that that Brexit arrangement has just been voted by the European Parliament, that sees the UK exiting the European Union. But English is definitely the lingua franca, and it's only the Irish in the European Union who hold English as their language. But yeah, it's a common language.
Let's talk about cryptocurrencies for a moment. There are many people who think it's a great investment opportunity. Other people think it's designed to do things that are illicit. Some people are thinking it's the wave of the future. What is the ECB's view on cryptocurrencies?
I think we tend to distinguish between the crypto assets, which we regard as a category of asset with its own logic, its own dynamics, and its own downside. But clearly that need to be supervised as such and as assets. We don't regard them as currencies. On the other hand, stable coins issued eventually by big techs, such as Facebook, for instance, with Diem, fall into a different category and would certainly like to be considered and like to play the role of a currency. And to that extent, I think that they should certainly be also properly regulated, supervised, and fall under the same category of those that conduct the same business. In other words, if they operate like a bank, if they take deposits like a bank, they should be regulated and supervised like a bank. We look at all these things with the concern of monetary policy, financial stability, information of consumers, and the supervision that we need to guarantee to consumers of financial products, and security when it comes to financing of terrorism and anti-money laundering regulations.
Let me ask you about digital currencies. You print the euro and many different denominations. Do you foresee at some point that you will go to a completely digital euro currency, or is that too far into the future to think about?
No, it's not too far in the future, David, and we are actually looking at it very carefully and exploring all the options, all risks associated with those options. We have consulted with the Europeans. We had a very broad consultation to understand whether it really corresponded to what people wanted, and it seems to be the case, while they insist of preserving their privacy. And we will be deciding in the summer whether we move ahead with experimenting for a period of 2 years before we really give the green light to setting it into motion. It's not an overnight process. It's a fairly complicated and a highly technical adventure that we would be launching. And if you look at what has happened around the world, the Chinese have started experimenting in 2015, and they're still not about ready to launch. Sweden started back about 5 years ago, and they believe that they won't be ready until 26. So all of that takes time, raises a lot of issues, and it needs to be done well. I think it's Jay who said, I don't mind not being first as long as I'm right doing it. I think we all feel about the same. If we get it done, it better be right, and we won't get a second chance to do so. But it's what people aspire to, and it will not move cash away. I think cash will still be around.
So one of the strengths of one's currency, I presume, is the desire of people to counterfeit it. And I suppose the most counterfeited currency is the $100 bill. But is the euro heavily counterfeited, and are you responsible at the ECB for preventing counterfeiting?
We are responsible as a euro system to issue banknotes and to make sure that the technical devices, the ink that we use, the texture of the banknotes, that is a very intimate mixture of paper and cotton, is such that it will be very difficult to counterfeit. But there are still some counterfeiting going around. Not much, though.
You mentioned earlier Brexit, and Brexit, I guess, is sort of in effect. Eventually, the British Parliament will finally vote for it, I assume. But what has been the impact on Europe and the EU of Brexit? As bad as people thought, not as bad as people thought, or unclear yet?
It's a little bit early to say what the exact economic impact will be. What we already see in the trade numbers is a very significant reduction of trade between the UK and the European Union. That is already obvious in the numbers. It has dramatically fallen on both sides. And it's affecting the UK more than it affects the EU, if only because of the size of the respective markets.
So when you're dealing with heads of state or prime ministers, is it the case where you feel that you have to convince them of something, or they have to convince you of something? As you said, you have the authority to do what you want, but who is trying to convince who of various things in most of your bilateral conversations with heads of state or prime ministers?
I think that the privacy of this discussion doesn't allow me to share the content with you. What I can tell you, though, is that when I sit at the European Leaders' Council table, I have seen during the pandemic and in the multiple video conferences and a few physical meetings that they had, a really strong sense of unity in the face of the danger that was upon all of them, and that has been a bit of a change. But what do we talk about? We talk about. I think that the conversations have predominantly been about the pandemic and about vaccinations and about the implementation, rollout, effectiveness, and actual support to the people, because the choice was made in Europe of people over profit, and any of the new instruments, the schemes put in place were intended to keep the economy afloat, to keep income going, and to make sure that people were not losing it all as a result of the pandemic. Okay,
and the G7 meeting is occurring in Europe in the near future. President Biden will be making his first trip to Europe as president. What are the expectations that Europeans have of this meeting? And are Europeans generally feeling differently about the United States than they did a couple years ago or under President Trump? Or is it too early to say?
I think the next G7 will be in the UK, and there is huge expectations on the part of the Europeans. because the tone at the top has changed. The conversation is different. There is a conversation with actual content and with actual, common references, common baseline, common denominator on many, many accounts. And, I've heard it and seen it very, very welcome in this part of the world. There is a sort of rejuvenated sense that the fraternity of arms that we had experienced decades ago is still alive, and there is a concern for each other and a care for each other's security and destiny. Yeah, I might be a bit romantic, but that's the way I see it.
So as you look forward to the next year, over the next 12 months, the biggest challenge that you face at the ECB is getting the economy to be better than it currently is, dealing with the pandemic. What would you say is your biggest challenge over the next 12 months?
I think the biggest challenge we have is to make sure that we deliver on our mandate. I think this is in a way very helpful because we have those track, or this track, which is price stability defined by reference to our inflation aims. So everything that we have to do is riveted towards that. But of course, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of an economy that is back, out of enterprises that are investing, consumers that are consuming, and an economy that is in revival mode. But I think the jury is still out as to how will people respond post-pandemic when the constraints disappear, when containment measures are off, when lockdowns is lifted. Are they going to go about their business as they did? Will the way forward be different? How will they spend? How will they use their savings? How will people invest? Will green investment be really driving the show? Will investment in digital be improving productivity? Will there be the enhancement to the economy that we aspire to? I think those are all the questions that we have, which are both exciting and a bit worrying because we don't have the answer. So what we are trying to do is to provide in that sort of sea of uncertainty, a little bit of certainty by saying favorable financing conditions we will preserve. Rest assured.
Now, one of the people who it is reported twisted your arm to take this position is Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. She persuaded you to do this. And she'll be stepping down in the not too distant future. And she's been the leader of Germany for very long, more than a decade. What do you think the impact will be on European leadership in terms of around the world, or in the impact on the EU or the ECB of not having Angela Merkel there?
Oh, I think much more competent people than me at the Aspen Institute could address that question. But it's clearly a seat of power that is suddenly vacated by someone who had been around for 16 years and who will be replaced by another chancellor whose name, personality, and political programs are still unknown at this point in time. So I think in such an environment as the European Union, vacuum in leadership is not for long. I would suspect that other leaders are going to step in, are going to try to take a bit of that space. But at the end of the day, a country like Germany, which is the largest player in the European Union, will continue to play a significant role, which is why the elections that are coming up in September are so important in terms of outcome. And I have no idea, don't ask me, who is next, whether it's going to be a woman or a man, I don't know. And I shouldn't say, but it will matter enormously.
Final question before we have questions from others. Your predecessor is now the head or prime minister of his country, Italy. What do you think about the idea of ECB presidents becoming presidents or prime ministers of their country? You think it's a good precedent?
I think it's a silly question, David.
All right. So you like the title president of the ECB, but you're happy with it just being the president of the ECB. Is that correct?
I've got my hands and my brain completely full. Thank you.
Okay. thank you very much for an interesting conversation. And I'll turn it over to the people at Aspen now. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much to David Rubenstein and Christine Lagarde. We're delighted now to open it up to questions from the audience. Our first question today is coming from Virginia Boney. She's one of the inaugural class of the Aspen Strategy Group Rising Leaders Program. So over to you, please, Virginia.
Sure. Good morning, Madam Lagarde, and thank you for speaking with us today. First, really quickly, I just wanted to thank you for being such a good role model for us young women that are trying to navigate the professional world, especially in the national security and foreign policy space. You set a very good example for all of us in being a female leader without compromising your style or your grace. So similar but separate issue, women's economic empowerment. I know it's an issue that you focused on during your time at the IMF and brought it kind of to the foreground of the policy discussions. Given everything that's happened in the last year, from the pandemic to global economic uncertainty to US foreign policy decisions in Afghanistan, how do we make sure that we don't backtrack on the progress we've made on women's economic empowerment when both history and current data shows that women are bearing much more of the economic cost and job losses during crises such as these? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much first. And, you know, as you say that women my age are good role models and have been helpful, I really encourage you and all young women to participate fully in those activities, even if they look like, smell like, feel like men's activities. There's no such a thing. And whether it's defense, it's finance, it's anything, you have to contribute, and it's critically important that you do. Wasn't it one of your original revolutionaries who said that that vigilance is the price of, or eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, or something like that? I believe the same is true when it comes to women empowerment and the place of women in society. We should never take anything for granted. There is a strong tendency, whenever convenient, possible, and feasible, for the tide to you know, come back. And I think that we all have that responsibility for younger ones to make sure that they have at least the same benefit and more than what we've had in terms of opportunities, in terms of equality, and in terms of non-discrimination. So as I said, eternal vigilance, and never caving in, never, you know, giving up, never waving.
Yes, I think you said it, that good leaders, it's courage, resilience, and I'm drawing a blank on the third one that you used when describing your mom once, but I think it's a good thing for all women to think about.
Yeah, grit your teeth and still smile, but grit your teeth and get on with it.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful advice. Thank you very much. Next up, we have the President Emerita of the Wilson Center, Jane Harmon.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon to three dear friends, including Nick, and to Christine, my chérie sœur. It is lovely to see you. That means dearest sister. And we bonded when I became head of the Wilson Center, first woman, and she became head of the IMF, first woman, and we've been close ever since. News to all of you, Christine has a new granddaughter born on Sunday, named Diane, and maybe it's Diane or Diane. At any rate, I thought everyone should know. I'm sure she will grow up to be the leader of France if Christine doesn't take the job first. So David asked my initial question about Sofagate, but it has more dimensions, as we've talked about. And Christine, the future of women and girls is something that empowers you. And I remember at the IMF, you appointed the first woman chief economist. There were no women there, and you did it. My question is about the future of work and women. Remote work is very bad for women, at least that's true in the United States. Many of them are dropping out of the workforce because they end up having to supervise the Zoom calls for their children, or otherwise taking on posts that no one else will fill. And so my question is, what can you do in terms of the ECB workforce to make sure that when you develop your hybrid system, you don't leave the women and girls behind?
Well, first of all, ma chérie sœur, it's really nice to see you, and congratulations for the launch of your new book. I'm delighted that you put pen to paper and completed the book until such book that we both write together. If I can make a comment on something that has just been released in your country, I think that the program that President Biden is launching to make sure that all very young toddlers can have access to kindergarten or childcare centers or something of that nature. I don't know exactly how it's called and for how many years it would be available, but I think that that is vitally important. In the countries that I have visited or where I have worked, the big difference at a time when young professionals can either make it or dog it is the time when young women can and often want to have children. If they are in a position, if the parents are in a position to have childcare centers, good services available, then it's going to help women more so than men, let's face it, enormously. So that's point number one. And we do have at the ECB those childcare centers available that we support financially so that young parents can actually feel comfortable dropping the toddlers in those centers, coming to work or staying at home and working from home, whichever is convenient. But in the what we call the way forward, we're going to pay special attention to that because we are concerned about two things. One, the fact that it's often women who take a heavier burden. And second, we are concerned about the mental health issues that have come up more so during the pandemic times than ever before. And that tells us that something needs to be looked into in terms of balance, in terms of support, in terms of services. Voila.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Michael Mossadegh, the PBS NewsHour legend. Michael.
Thank you very much. Reading the FT these days is like reading the daily crime report. These various financial scandals, some of them are happening on the edge of the EU and probably out of your jurisdiction, like Archegos and Greenfields. Wirecard is going on right within Germany. Are you concerned that this financial fraud could start imperiling the European and world financial system, much the way that the shenanigans with bank lending in the United States did back in 2007 and 2008?
You know, I think on that front there's a nice balance. Archegos, to my knowledge, has afflicted multiple banks, but did not happen specifically out of Europe. And the family office was certainly not located in Europe. And to my knowledge, none of the banks under the supervision of the ECB have been affected or have recorded losses. So I think, you know, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details of which banks it was and where it all started, but I don't think that I would take that Europe should take credit for Archegos. On the other two, there are clearly schemes that were put in place of a fraudulent nature that clearly were not caught up in time and properly either by the auditors or by the financial authority, which should have caught up with what was happening and the fraud that was organized. You know, it's a constant quest and a constant expectation search to actually find, debunk and you know, identify those operations. I don't think it has anything to do specific with Europe, and I think that now that the SSM, which is the Common Supervisory Authorities that is supervising the whole of the systemic institutions in Europe, has been in place, which is only about 6 years ago, I think it has a pretty decent track record and has been very successful at making sure that the banks in particular were stronger, were better capitalized, had the right buffers, which is really the heart of the supervision that they do. Now, you cannot manage to completely eliminate the fraudulent criminal activities that are schemed and put in place deliberately by people who are criminals.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Our next question is from Ambassador Tom Korologos, the former U.S. Ambassador to Belgium. Ambassador Korologos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lagarde. Excellent presentation, and it's good to see our friends David and Nick and Jane, even though from far away remote areas. My question goes, I read the other day that authorities confiscated 27 tons of cocaine and methane coming into Europe, probably through Antwerp and elsewhere. This has got to have an impact on some kind of an economic structure. Is the ECB, what are you doing with money that might come from that kind of a drug operation? And does ECB worry about a thing like that?
This is clearly outside the jurisdiction of the ECB, but obviously we are very pleased that authorities, particularly when they can liaise and operate in a coordinated fashion, can actually stop that kind of trafficking, which is in violation of all the rules, which is criminal, which is involving probably all sorts of countries around the world, given the quantities that you're referring to. But this is part of this underground business where anonymous payment means and terms should not be used, and which is one of the reasons why I am particularly concerned about the use of some crypto alleged to be means of payment, which are not actually means of payment because they don't actually fit the functions of means of payment, but they are used by those sorts of traffics. Not exclusive of other users, I'm sure, but that it's through that angle, if you will, that we're concerned.
Thank you very much for the question, Ambassador Korologos, and thank you, Madam Lagarde. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Melissa Kearney, who's the director of the Aspen Economic Strategy Group, for our closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Niamh. On behalf of the Economic Strategy Group and our colleagues at the Aspen Security Forum, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, and I want to extend our gratitude to Christine Lagarde and David Rubenstein for their insightful and important conversation that managed to cover an extraordinary number of topics. This conversation has underscored the need for global leadership on the many urgent economic challenges facing Europe and the United States, including bringing a close to the COVID pandemic that has defined our shared existence for the past year, and despite great progress on vaccination, still isn't over. We've also heard about the continued need for both fiscal and monetary policy efforts to foster a broad-based economic recovery and the many elements of uncertainty that characterize that path forward. We've heard too about the need for multinational and multifaceted cooperation to address the ongoing challenge of climate change, which similarly affects all aspects of our lives, including, as President Lagarde emphasized, the resilience of our financial system. It is a key goal of ours at the Economic Strategy Group to foster robust conversation and productive solutions to challenges like the ones we just heard about. Our group has put out a number of reports over the past years that tackle many of the topics that were just discussed, including how to foster an economic recovery post-pandemic, ways to make progress on the global climate challenge, and various approaches to addressing income inequality. These products can be found at our website, economicstrategygroup.org. So I do encourage you all to check out those products. I also want to invite you to join the Aspen Security Forum for their upcoming event this Friday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the Biden administration's first 100 days in review. This virtual event will feature National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks, former Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun, and Chairman of BlackRock Investment Institute and former National Security Advisor Tom Donilon. These speakers will examine the Biden administration's efforts to modernize the US military. They will address foreign policy challenges, including those from China and Russia, and many more topics. Please visit the Aspen Security Forum's website to register for that event. Before I close, I want to again thank President Lagarde and David Rubenstein for this fantastic conversation. And I will say that I appreciate President Lagarde's acknowledgement that while convenient, telework is not a perfect substitute for the intellectual brain sharing that happens when we're together in person. I very much look forward to the day when we can have conversations like these together again. That observation notwithstanding, this has been an excellent virtual event. I thank you both, and I thank all of you who took the time to log on and join us virtually this morning.